Good afternoon, this is Jason Robinson with RJG in Woodstock, Georgia. If you've ever had data on the eDART not look correct or not look the way that you know it's supposed to look, maybe you just installed the eDART to your machine and the data doesn't make sense. One critical installation step is to make sure that the ID7 module, which lives in the cabinet of the machine, is installed correctly. There's a wiring harness that connects onto one of these terminals, and then there's 7 different inputs that we can hardwire from the machine. Goes through this module into the eDART system. What that does is it gives the eDART a real clear picture of what the machine is doing, the current state that it's in during the cycle. I'm going to show you the relationship between how this is physically installed in the machine and how you can troubleshoot that here on the eDART itself. There's 2 things we're going to look at. We're going to look at the sequence lights and then the sequence module inputs. And I'm going to tell you the differences between those 2 and how they're related. Let's take a look. Here we have that cycle running. I got it zoomed in. We're looking at a few curves here. The volume, the purple, the red is injection pressure. The green and blue are cavity pressure curves. So now let's click down on the main menu on the bottom left on my screen. It's going to bring up a set of menus. The next thing we're going to go to is what's called sequence lights. I'm going to click on that right now. And then that brings up the sequence lights box. And you see the red injection forward, the yellow hold, the blue plastic cooling light up, and now the magenta screw run signal. So let's let that cycle one more time. There's mold open in the top right. And then there's mold clamped, injection forward, fill happens really fast, hold, and then plastic cooling. The sequence lights box is a combination of hardwired signals from the ID7 and interpreted information that the eDART can figure out. So next, if I click on sequence inputs at the bottom of that sequence lights box, now I can see the 5 hardwired sequence module inputs coming from the molding machine to the ID7 module. Now these, we have injection forward, screw run, mold closing, and then mold opening. If you notice, we don't have fill, hold, and plastic cooling. Those are all interpreted signals in the sequence lights. Now let's back up one step further and take a look at sensor locations. So main menu again, main menu, sensor locations, and say yes. It's going to wait for the end of the cycle. Now we're going to see which, basically we're seeing the same thing as the sequence module inputs, but we're seeing all of them. So what we see there is the same ones lighting up: injection forward. That one's called screw run that's lighting up right now. And then mold opening. And then mold clamped flickers on just for a little bit. In most situations, the mold clamp stays on during the whole injection forward and hold cycle. This is a little bit different situation. And then the mold opening, the one word of advice is to call it what it is. So when you see the green light up here, look at what the machine's doing and click the drop down menu and call it actually what's happening. So I just hit accept. If in case I change anything, it's going to wait for the end of the cycle. Here is the schematic of the ID7 that the sequence module inputs wire up to. And here we have the schematic of the same ID7 showing the 2 links cables, one going from the machine to the ID7 and the other from the ID7 back to the eDART. So here we have an ID7, a real one in my hand. So this is the module that goes into the cabinet. So it's called the ID7 because there are 7 inputs. There's a ground, and then there's 6 potential machine inputs. It comes with a wiring harness, like we have here. This wiring harness connects onto there. It goes from the module to the machine via these ends of the cables. And then there's another links cable that goes here that goes from the module to the eDART. So we have 6 inputs, and they correspond to what we saw earlier on the sensor locations and the sequence module inputs. We have an injection forward, a first stage, screw run, mold clamped, mold open, and then we have a manual, and we have a shuttle input for shuttle applications. Now, we don't have to have all of those. The minimum that we require are an injection forward signal, a mold clamp signal, and the screw run signal. Having those 3 give you good, reliable data. So if you hardwire these from your machine into here, the eDART has a really good idea of what's happening with your machine, and it has to do less interpretation. The wiring harness is labeled. So these have the injection forward, screw run, mold clamped signals that correspond to here. Again, the minimum are injection forward, screw run, and mold clamped. Some common, and these are going to be 24-volt signals coming from your machine into here. A common mistake that gets made, so we have some literature that explain this in detail, but injection forward, for example, that would be from the beginning of injection till the end of hold. I jokingly call it the screw pushing forward signal. So the whole time that the screw is pushing plastic into the mold, that is called injection forward. The other, and that gets confused with the first stage trigger that's on here. First stage is only during the velocity phase of the machine. So it goes from when the injection begins till the machine hits transfer or cutoff or V2P, whatever it's called on your brand of machine. So the mold clamp just helps, it resets the cycle for the eDART. So that's what designates the end of the cycle and the start of the next cycle. And the screw run obviously is just telling us during the screw rotation time, when the screw's rotating, that trigger needs to be on. So I'm going to insert a link into this video showing us the where to go on our website to get the literature on setting up the ID7. I'm going to insert the definitions of our of our triggers, of our 6 triggers. That way you can have a clear definition. And what can go wrong? Why am I spending so much time on this? If you have triggers either not labeled properly or not the 3 that are required, data can be weird. It can confuse the eDART. The eDART can do a pretty good job of calculating some things, like, for example, fill. If you don't have a first stage trigger, the eDART can just have an injection forward signal, and it'll look at the peak pressure and the movement of the screw, and it does a really good job of calculating what part of that movement forward was fill and what part of it was second stage pack or hold. But especially if you label them wrong, like if you label mold clamp and wire it up to screw run or something really, really crazy like that, the data on your eDART can be very, very screwy and really confusing. So if you call customer support, one of the first things they're going to ask you, they're going to look at your triggers, your machine triggers, and make sure they're hooked up correctly. So hopefully with this video, you can do that on your own and maybe save yourself the time of having to get in touch with customer support and maybe solve some of your problems on your own. Thank you and have a good day.